Howdy, everyone. So this is Eric, and this is week one of Quant Plus, where me and Crystal will be discussing Excel's basic tips and tricks and if statements, lookups, and macros. So how this is going to work is that we're going to be sending out this in lecture recordings in three different video segments where I'll be discussing if statements in the first one, which you're watching right now, lookups, which will be the second video segment, which I'll be discussing also. And finally, Crystal will be discussing macros in the third video segment. So let's get to it. What you need to know about if statements is that it's a very common tool to be used in Excel. How it works is basically if a certain value is true, if a certain scenario is true, then you tell Excel to do this. Otherwise, you tell Excel to do that. These statements will be very useful, especially when using VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs. We'll be getting into the next video. They can also apply to mathematical functions like counting, sums, averages, you name it. So what I have prepared here is an example that uses these if statements in these scenarios. Here I have a bit of a data set of temperature and precipitation in the months from January to March. Now, based on the pre-sentence survey we sent out, looks like everybody knows how to use the count, sum, average functions, all those things, so I won't waste any time with that. So instead, what I will focus on is how the if statements apply to these mathematical functions. So this first question here asks, count the number of days with high temperature lower than 40 degrees. So this is where the if statements applies to the count function. So we'll start with count equals, count ifs, and in parentheses, temperature H, because we are looking at the temperature column and we are looking for those less than 40. So quotation mark, less than 40 degrees, so that Excel knows which 40 degrees we're talking, which number 40 we're talking about in this table. So then click enter, and then we find that there are 6 days with a high temperature lower than 40 degrees. Now, one thing I want to mention is that before this, what you'll want to do is you'll want to label or create these columns from your selection. So here I have the column temperature H for high temperature. So how I did that was beforehand I highlighted the temperature H column all the way down to the bottom and clicked create from selection, create names in top row, and clicked OK. And then this column here should be labeled as temperature H. It's the same case here with temp L. If you highlight here, create from selection from top row, you'll label this data set as temperature L. Same here with precipitation. This is the precipitation column. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Count the number of days with the high temperature lower than 40 degrees and with the precipitation record. Now, this is a if statement where you need to take into account two different scenarios. It's not just the temperature, it's also precipitation. So we'll start with equals, count ifs. We'll look at first temperature, high temperature, temp H, less than 40 degrees. And we need to look at precipitation. So precip for the precipitation column, comma, quotation mark. We're looking for those that have at least any precipitation, so greater than 0. And we count that 5 days have a high temperature lower than 40 degrees and have had precipitation. Now we move on to the sums. The total precipitation was 3.79, just using the sum precip. Now, this next question asks, what was the total precipitation for days with high temperature between 40 and 68? So this one is very specific. So we'll start with some ifs. So precipitation, because that's mainly what we're looking for, precipitation for days with temperature H highest temperature greater than, to quotation mark, greater than or equal to 40, and as well as highest temperature that is less than or equal to 68. Let's parentheses and hold on a second. Oh, whoops, my mistake. Some ifs. Okay, my mistake. So that is 3.41 total precipitation for days with highest temperature between 40 and 68 degrees. Now on to average ifs. So average local temperature here is listed as 41.35 degrees. Now the question asks, what was the average precipitation on days with low temperature lower than the average low temperature here? So how we're going to do this is just like sum and counts, we have average ifs. So we're looking for mainly precipitation. So we start with precip. And then for the conditions, we need to type out temperature L for low temperature, comma, quotation mark, less than, and F25 for the average low temperature that we just found or already found. So parentheses, enter, and we get the average precipitation was 0.12. Now, another way you can type this out is average ifs, precip, temperature L, comma, quotation mark, and quotation mark, less than, and also another thing, make sure you type down the and symbol to make sure that you are adding in the right value that you're typing in for your conditions. So, and average temperature, low temperature. And what happens? Oops, sorry, I forgot to add a second parentheses. So you get the same number. So depending on how you like to type it, you can either type in the specific cell or you can just type in the formula for it. So average temperature L at 25, it's all the same. Now lastly, what was the average low temperature on days with precipitation record in January? So we need to find the average low temperature on days with precipitation as well as those in January. So we're not looking for those, we're not looking for the months in February, the days in February and March. We're looking only at January. So we'll start with average ifs, parentheses. So low temperature, that's what we're looking for. And we're also looking for days with precipitation. So greater than 0. And we're looking for days within January. So date, comma, and quotation mark, January. And one thing I want to mention, make sure you add the asterisk here to specify that you're looking for the days in January. So, and then enter, and you get an average of 39.28 degrees. So this is how if statements apply to mathematical functions. Now, I'd like to explain how if statements are used by themselves. So here we have the same data set with a different set of questions. Now, label a day rain if there was precipitation, otherwise shine. Now this one is relatively simple, so all we need to do is type it out as equals if, so B3, it's if D3 because that's where the precipitation column is. If it's greater than 0, then it will be rain. This is the value for true. If it's false, then it is labeled as shine. So, and then there you have it. So because this day did not have rain, it is labeled as shine. Now we want to apply this to all rows in this table. So just click on the lower right hand of the cell, drag it down all the way to the bottom. And this if statement will be copied to all rows. So any days with precipitation should be labeled rain. Otherwise, it is labeled as shine. So next we have labeled day warm if high temperature is higher than 68, cold if lower than 40, normal otherwise. So the difference here is that we have to list 3 different scenarios, unlike the first question where it's only 2. So how we'll do this is start with if. So it'll be 3. We're looking at highest temperature if it's greater than 68. It'll be labeled as warm, but if that is not the case, then that means it'll be labeled as cold. Or that's probably what you would think at first, but it turns out we need to add a if statement inside the if statements. So next, after this comma, we start with if B3 is less, if B3 is less than 40 degrees, then it will be cold. Otherwise, it will be labeled as normal. So one parentheses mark for this if statement here, and then another for this whole statement here, and click enter. So this is labeled normal. And again, click on the bottom right, scroll down, drag it down, and you get all the days labeled as normal, warm, or cold. Now, lastly, we have label a day miserable if high temperature is lower than 40 degrees and there was precipitation. Otherwise, it's okay. So this is an if statement where you'll need to take into account multiple scenarios at the same time. So start with if, and we'll be using an and statement because we're applying 2 scenarios at the same time. So if and B3, high temperature is less than 40 degrees, and the precipitation, D3, is greater than 0, then it will be marked as miserable. Otherwise, it is okay. So, and this day is okay. It was never less than 40 degrees and there was no precipitation, so it's okay. Click on right, drag it down, and you'll see which days were labeled okay and which one was miserable. And this last question, count the number of days labeled miserable. I think I'd like to let you try it out for yourself. I believe you should be able to do so after the first example. Okay, so this is how if statements can be used. Now, hopefully this is helpful, and I'll end it here. I'll see you in a little bit in the lookups video.